Hello and welcome to this video. In this tutorial, quickly I'm going to show you how to create a React slider component. We are going to be using the HTML5 range input and we are going to add our CSS styles. The slider component will take in some props like the minimum value, the maximum value, and then we are also going to add some default value. So if you want to add a default value, and then we are also going to be using the linear gradients. So you can see right here, the minimum value is 0, the maximum value is 100, and the default value right now, or the current value, is 10. So as the user moves this SliderTom right here, you can see that the value changes, and here we are adding a linear gradient. So the user can move to the maximum, also can move it back right here. And I'm also going to show you how we are going to add these colors as props, so that in case you want to change the linear gradient color and also this tom color, you can add that as well. We are going to be using a third-party module for that. I will show you how to go about it. Now, for us to get started, let's first of all create our React application. So right here, I'm inside the directory where I want to save my projects. As usual, I'm going to be using create React app, and it comes with npx. If you already have Node.js installed, you don't need to worry. Npx comes installed with npm. So I just need to run the command npx create -react -app, then the name of your project. I'll call mine React -slider. So this is going to be the name of the project. I'll hit enter. Now this is going to take some time, so I'll pause. Once it's complete, we're going to continue. So right here, you can see the project has been created. Now all we just need to do is open up the project. I'm going to be using Visual Studio Code, and then we can start running commands or creating our component. So I'm going to cd into the React slider right here, and I'll use code then dot to open it up with Visual Studio Code right here. So right now, this is what we have. Now, because we are using create React app, if you don't want to use create React apps, you can go ahead and create all of this from scratch, create all the necessary files and add the configurations, but we are not going through all that. So we are going to be working inside our source directory. We probably will not be using this logo and also this test, service worker and setup test. You can delete that if you want, because we are not going through all that. What we are most interested in is going to be this app.js, this index or the index.css, and also we are going to create a slider component. Now, if you open up this, the app.js component, you can see the create React app uses the functional component. Now in React, you can either use functional components or you use the class components. But with create React app, it uses the functional components. So I'll just change this to an arrow function. You can create your functions this way, or you can create it as an arrow function, which I'm going to do right here. So right now, this is an arrow function. Now we're going to take some of these parts out, probably all of the contents here, and change this to a div. So before I do that, open up your terminal and you can either use yarn or npm start. Now this is going to start the server right here. Okay. So while we wait for this to load, it's running on port 3000 right here. Like I said, we are only going to be using this app component and also create the slider component. Now you can see this is the content of the app component right here. You can see all this, but we don't need all of this. So I can go ahead and take all this out, even the image. And this header, I'll change this to a div. Let me just do this here as well. I don't need the logo. I can leave these class names. Here I'll put a p tag. And I'll call this React slider component right here. If I save this now and go back, you can see what I have here, React slider component. Now, if you want, you can go into the app.css, delete the CSS properties that we don't need. We don't need all these parts, so we just have only the app and the app header, because those are what we have right here. So inside this element, that is where we are going to be adding our slider component. And then one more thing, if you go into index.css right here, index CSS, you can decide to delete all of this. If you want to use probably or add your own font family, you can just delete all this, probably leave the margin body, delete all these parts, then add your font family. But we can leave it for now, or later I can just decide to change it, but for now let me just leave it the way it is. Now, to get started with creating the components, like I said, we are only going to be having this app component and our slider component. So in the source, I'll create a new directory. I'll call this slider, and inside the slider directory, I'll create two files, slider.js and slider.css. Now in React, as you know, you can either use an extension JS, you can use JSS, or you can even use TypeScript. So I'm most comfortable with using JS, so that is why I'm using this extension, so I can easily create functional components, or you can also create class components. But we are going to be sticking with functional components, and our functional component is going to be an arrow function like this. Now, the first thing we need to do, as usual, is you need to import React. So here in the slider component, or the slider.js file, we are going to import React, create our arrow function, and then export the function. And then, like I said some time ago, we are going to be using HTML5 range input. So first, import React from React right here. And now the next thing is for us to create our function. So const, I'll call it slider, or you can call it whatever name you want, and it's going to be an arrow function right here. And now this arrow function usually returns some elements. So here we just do return, and here you can add a div if you want, or if you don't want to use the div, you can just use empty tags, and inside the empty tags you can then add whatever elements you want, or you can also use fragments. If you want to use fragments, all you need to do is import fragments from React, and then here you pass fragments. So what's going to happen with this is, in the DOM, this element will not be displayed. So this element will not appear in the DOM. So if you don't want to do it this way, you can either use the div, or you can use empty tags. And inside the empty tags, that is where you are going to add your other element. So slider component. Now the next thing we need to do is, let me remove this fragment, I don't need it. The next thing we need to do is to export this component. So I'm going to be exporting this component as default. So export default slider. And as you know, if you export a component or a function basically in JavaScript right now as default, then whatever you are importing in any component where you want to import that module or function or whatever, you just import without putting the curly braces. But if you just export as a regular function here, then wherever you are going to be importing, you have to do import slider from wherever you are importing it from. But if you are exporting as default, then all you need to do is import slider without the curly braces. So you can either do it this way, or you use the curly braces. So I'm going to leave it this way. So we've created our functional components right here using the arrow function. Let's use it in our app.js. To use this is very simple. We just need to import. So down here, import slider from slider, then slider.js. We don't need to put the extension. And then down here, this is where I'm going to add my slider component. So here we have our slider component. Later we are going to see how to pass props into these components, and then the props will be used inside our slider component. So I'll save this. Now you can see I have the text. I have this text right here, slider component. So now we have our components. Let's start working on adding the functionalities. So the first thing I would like to do is get the props that I'm going to pass into this component. Right now I don't have the components, right, or the properties here in the components, but since I know what I want, I'm going to just destructure it. So I'll set props, right? So the function here is going to take the props as a property. Sometimes in some functions they can destructure the properties directly here, and then you add whatever you want to do, but I prefer doing it this way, props. And then down here you use the object destructuring equal to props. So here the different properties are, I beg your pardon, we are going to get the step. Let me move this down because we're going to add lots of properties. So the first is going to be the step, because in the HTML range input you can add the step how you want the range steps to be added. So we're going to add the steps. Then the next property, the minimum value or the mean. Then also I'm going to pass the max or the maximum value. And then here as well I'm going to pass the value that the user, or that will be displayed once the user starts moving the SliderTom. I'll call that a value. And then also I'll set my default length. Now you can leave this out. If you always want your default length to start from 0, you can leave this out. But if you want it to start at the different value, you can set this default length. And then also for now I'll just add the onChange value. We are going to add some other props for the colors, but I'll leave that out for now. Let's just go with what we have right here. So now I have the props. So these are the properties that will be added into this slider component. Then the next thing we need to do, let's go ahead now and add the input. So here in this div, I'm going to add a class name of slider-container right here. And inside I'm going to add my input. Now this input will take in some properties. So I can set the class name. We're going to change this later or add something else. So I'll call this range slider. So this input, like I said, is going to be of type range. So set the type right here, range, and then set the step. The step is going to be what we are destructuring from the props or whatever the user is going to pass. Then the minimum value is going to be min. The maximum value is going to be max. Then the value that is going to be added by the user is going to be value, and on change. Note in React, most of the time on an input, wherever you are adding the on change, you need to add the value property as well. Or if you are adding a value property on an input, you need to add the on change function most of the time. So here now, instead of using this onChange value, it's coming from the props. We are going to do something different. I'm going to create a function called handle change right here, and this is going to take the maximum value. Now this handle change is a function that will be created inside this component. In fact, let me do that right now. So const handle change, then it's going to take the maximum value, and then this onChange value or this onChange method, we are going to be passing it inside this here. So I'm going to call this onChange method, and before that, this handle change also needs to take in the event. So you can say event right here, or E for short, whichever one. So this is just the event, and then I'll call the onChange, and then you pass in the event. So what I have done right now is this onChange value. We are going to see why we are adding this onChange value later. So from wherever component this slider will be used, this onChange value will be used to set the range value inside that particular component, and we're calling it right here. So because we have this handle change on the input, whatever the value of this is, then we are going to use this onChange to set it inside the component. Take for example, because we are going to call this slider component here, so whatever is set on this input, we are going to use this onChange to set that value inside this component, and we can do whatever we want with the value. I will show you how to do that, and we are going to be using the useState. So basically this is going to be like a useState function, or rather just a normal function or an arrow function. I will show you how to do that. So now we have all this. If I save, nothing basically will happen. If I go back to the browser, you can see how it looks. Yeah, I'm getting this error here. It's expected, but we are going to fix that. So let me reload this. So right now you can see this is how it looks. We have the slider itself and we have the Tom. Now we will need to add the CSS style so that we style this properly. But before then, let's go ahead and add some of this input or this props. So go to your app component where this slider is used. Right here. So I'll set the minimum value. I'll set it to 0, whatever you want. Then also I'll set the maximum value to 100. I'll set the step to 1. So whenever this Tom is moved, the value will be either incremented or decremented by 1. So the step is going to be 1. If you set this step as 10, then the step, whenever this is moved, it's going to be incremented or decremented by 10. But I will leave it as 1. And then default length, let me set this to 40 for now. We are going to dynamically add this. I'll show you how. And then value, I'll change this as well. Let me set this to 50. Let's see. Now for this onChange value, I'll copy this because this is the prop name. Set it here. Now this is going to be equal to a function, and I'll call that function onChange slider right here. Now we need to create this onChange slider. So const onChange slider, which takes in the events right here. So what is going to happen is whenever this slider value is changed, whatever this is moved, we are going to be setting the value or the event into this onChange value, and that whatever it is, that is what we are setting right here. And then inside this onChange slider, we are going to use the useState hook. So I'm going to add a hook called useState so that we can change the value. So the variable is called range value, and the method that will be used to update the range value, I'll call it SetRange value. And then here useState. Now this useState can take a default, so I'm going to replace this with, say, 10. Let me leave it at 10 for now. Now let's make some changes here. I'm going to replace this with range value here as well. Replace this with range value. Now inside this unchanged slider, what we just need to do is set range value. Now this value, sometimes it comes as a string, so I want to cast it to a number. So what I'm going to do is, instead of passing just event.target.value, if I do it this way, then whatever value is being passed here will always be a string. So I want it to be a number. I will use pass int and then the radius. You can see the string you want to convert and the radius, which is a number, we want to cast it to a base 10 number. So this is just all we need to do right here. So whenever the slider changes or the value is changed, we are going to set the value with this SetRange method coming from this useState. And as you know, it returns a stateful value and a function to update. So this is the stateful value, and this is the function we are using to update this range value. And here the range value we are passing as the default. So when the page loads for the first time, it's going to take a default value of 10, which we're setting as default. I think you can even remove this because right here this value is taking also the default. So when we load, it's taking the default as well. So we can remove this, but for now I will leave it. Now you can see the default value is taking this range and the value itself. So whatever is coming from this event.target.value, that is what we are passing right here. And we have the props. So these properties on the left hand side must match what you have here as the props. Now I'm going to save this. Let's see. Now you can see the position of this has changed. If I change this to 70, go back. Now you can see the position here as well as changed because it's using the default value right here. So now that we have some of the properties inside the component, let's now add the styles. Now I'm not going to type all of the styles because it's going to take us too much time. So you can go to the GitHub link provided in the description of this video. You can then go to the slider.css file, copy, and then you can paste it right here. So it's going to take us much time if we decide to type all of this out, which is not what I want. Right here. So if we start, you can see we have the slider container right here, which is the main container. We just have the margin bottom and the width. Then we have the range slider, which is the input itself. Then also we have the styles for the Tom, the SliderTom, which is this right here. You can see. So we're adding styles here. We are just adding setting appearance to none, the width, the height, the border radius. I want it to be circular. Then the cursor to be pointer, and I'm setting a background transition. Now if you notice here, there is no background color, or I'm not adding any background color or box shadow. Now the reason why I did that is because I want to do it dynamically so that the user can pass the color that they want displayed for the slider, for this slider, and also this Tom. So here, if you notice, the slider itself, we just have this background color. I can leave this here, or I will show you how you can make this dynamic, but for now I will leave this. But for the SliderTom, both for the WebKit and the mugs. Right here you can see no background color. And then we have this other class which we have not added the elements. So these are just some simple CSS properties. I'm going to save this and then go to the slider components, then import the style, the slider.css. So let me save and see. Now you can see how it looks. Now we are not seeing the Tom, the WebKit SliderTom, because no stars added yet. But the background color right here, if I change this to red, let's see what's going to happen. Now you can see the main slider right here, the background color is red, but I'm going to leave this color here. So this will always be the color for this slider. Then when we add the linear gradient, the color is going to be dynamic. The user can set the color as a prop. So this is what we have right now. Then let us go ahead and add some other properties. So create down here, after the input, create a span tag, and this is going to be where the range value, as the user moves the Tom, the value will be displayed here. So let me just call this 40, just a number for now, and then I'll set a class name. Now the class name, we already have the style right here, which is range slider value. You can set this right here, and then I'll add another div element, so we'll display the minimum and the maximum values. I'll call this range. I think I already have the styles. Yep. I'm going to copy this and then paste right here. Here I'm just going to put two span tags, 0. Then this is going to be another span tag, 100. So I'll display the minimum value here. In fact, I can do that. Minimum value and maximum value. So add these properties, the span tag and then the div with the span tags for the minimum and the maximum values. Save that, go back. Now you can see I have the minimum value here, the maximum value here. Now this value, which is the range slider value, it's going to have a background color. We are not seeing any background because we don't have the colors set yet at this point. So what I'm going to do is I'll go ahead and add the color props. So go back to your app.js. Right here, I'll set the linear, I'll call it linear gradient color. You can add whatever color you want your slider to have. So mine is 4A1F3. And then the range background color. Basically, the range background color will be the same as what I already have right here. So you can take this out. Now, if you're adding this, you can decide to remove this one here as well. And then the last color, I'll call this SliderTom color. You can set this to whatever color you want. So I now have the linear gradient color, the range background color, and the SliderTom color. I'll save this. Nothing is going to happen right now. So let me just get all this from here. I think I'll copy this, then copy this other one, and then this as well, right here. So now these colors will be coming in as props. So whatever the user sets here, we are going to use them. Nothing is going to happen because we are not using the colors. Right now, we have not added the functionality for using this linear gradient color or the range gradient color, as well as this SliderTom color. Now, these two we can use if we add the functionality for linear gradient color, but styling the SliderTom, it's somewhat challenging if you want to do it inside the component. We can easily style it right here inside our CSS. So inside this range slider, this WebKit is basically for Chrome. So here, if I just set a background or a background color, let me just set this to red. So I'll set the background color of this to red, and now go back. Now you can see the Tom. I have the Tom right here, but we are going to change the style. We are going to change the background color is going to be dynamic, and we are going to add a box shadow to this as well. So it's very challenging to style this here from the component. You can easily do it from the CSS file, but if you want to make the colors dynamic, it's challenging. So that is where we are going to be using a module called React GSS. So you can go to the browser and search for React GSS. So this React GSS is just basically using styles inside your React or React functions. So GSS integration with React. Now this will help us to add some dynamic styles into our React component. Now we can use the style property to add dynamic styles into our component by easily, you can just add style right here and set background of whatever you want. But in this case, the reason why I'm using this is because of this property. This is different. It's challenging to style elements that has this kind of property, or you want to use the after or the before property. So we can't easily do that here with this style. That is why I opted to use this GSS or the React GSS. So with that, we are going to call this property on the element and then add the required styles. So what I'm going to do now is I will get this installed. I am not going to talk much about this. I'm just going to show you how to easily integrate this into your React application. So to install this is very simple. You can use yarn or you use npm. So I'll copy this part because Create React app uses yarn. You can see we have this yarn.log. So I'll open this and then install this module. So I'll wait for this to be installed. So now I have the React GSS module installed. So this module basically is a way for using, or which allows you to use JavaScript to describe your CSS style. So we are going to see how to do that right here. And I say it can compile in the browser, both on the server side and build time if we are using Node, because that is what we are using here with our Create React app. So to get this working, if you see here the basic installation, we just need to call this create use styles from create or React GSS, create something like a hook from it, set the properties you want, and then you just call with classes dot the name of the property you're setting here. So I'm not going to use these basic properties here. Instead, I'm going to use these dynamic values. So I want to add this dynamically because we have our SliderTom color here coming as a prop. So I want to add this dynamically. So first thing I'm going to do, or if we go back, we need to import this right here and then create these properties using the create use styles, and then we call this as a hook, passing in the props. So whatever we pass in the props, we can get right here, and then we call the class name. So first import this. So just import this right here, and then inside the slider component, right, I'm going to define the use styles. So const use styles equal to create use styles. Now this function is going to take an object. Now inside this object, that is where we are going to pass all the properties with the different styles. Like I said, we want to use this WebKit SliderTom. If you want to style for Chrome or for Mozilla, you can use this. Or if you want to use this after property or before property, we can do it right here. So this is an object. The first value is going to be, I'll call it range slider, which is the key. This is going to be an object. And then inside here, we need to pass this property. So I'll just copy this part here, copy this, and in bracket, or rather in quotes, I'm going to use the ampersand symbol and then paste the other part right here. This is going to be an object as well. And then here we can add our styles. And how do we add our style? This is an object, so you can come right here. So you add the property, which is an object, and then call the name of the CSS property. If you want to get your value from props, you call in the props and set equal to props, then whatever you have right here. Now what I'm going to do, I will do it exactly the way they did it here. So I want to set the background color. So props. Now I'm going to remove this from here. Let me just delete this from here. So instead, this is going to be props dot SliderTom color. So right, you can either do it this way, or if you already have it destructured, you do it this way and then call this. Then we need to add this right here. You can do it this way because this is a function, or you do it this way. I'll leave it. So here now, for whatever property we are going to add this range slider to, we are going to call this WebKit SliderTom and set the background color using this SliderTom color that we are passing right here. Now this, like I said, it's dynamic, so whatever the user passes into this SliderTom color, that is what is going to be set here. So now let's use this. This is like a hook. So down here, I'm going to call const. If we go back here, you can see we called const classes, then we call this use style hook. So this is a hook right here. So I'll call this classes equal to use styles, and then we need to pass in the props. Now the next thing is we call classes dot, then the name of the key inside this object. Now remember I said this we are going to change. So now let's see how to change this so that we can add the dynamic property. So I'll copy or cut this out, then use braces, and then use the backticks. I'm going to add this range slider because we need this. We have the property here, and then the other property is going to be classes dot. You can see I have the range slider defined right here. This is just all we need to do to use this range slider properties. So save. If I go back, now you can see the color here has changed. So if I change the color, let me change this to green. Save, go back, you can see it's green. If I change it to yellow, you can see it's now yellow. Let me go back. Doing this, changing this here, because if you check, if you inspect this element, you would not find this particular property here. So it's very difficult to style this just by using the inline CSS style. It's very difficult to use inline CSS style. to style this particular property, because right here you can see I can't find this Tom elements here. I only have the input. So it's very difficult to style this. That is why I decided to use this React GSS to dynamically style this property. Now another thing that I need to add is I want to change how this looks, so I'm going to add a box shadow. Now to add a box shadow to this is very simple. Here I'm going to set box shadow. Now you can see here, for properties that are separated by dash in React, we add them as in camel case. So this is going to be props, and then here, if you are not using props, you can just easily do it this way. Use the basic style. You can see if you want to set a color, you want to set margin, you want to add a span property to an element or something like that, you can do it all this way. So now for the props, I'll use backticks as well. So what I want for this, or for the box shadow, is I want it to look as though it has two elements right here. So I'm going to add a box shadow and set the color. So I'm going to set 0, 0, 0, and then 3 pixels, and then we are setting the first color to white. So the first element, we have these properties 0, 0, 0, then 3 pixels, and the color itself is going to be white. So this is going to be circular. And then the second property 0, 0, 0, 6 pixels, and then I'm going to use props dot SliderTom color. This is supposed to be props. So this box shadow property basically adds shadows to elements, and these are just the offset properties. So I'm setting the offset. You can check out the properties, what they're called. I think H sets, the horizontal offset, the vertical offset, or offset, and then I have the colors. So right here, this is going to be the first shadow, and this is going to be the second shadow. So now let me save this. Let's go back. Now you can see how it looks. It looks as though we have two elements right here. So the first one has a box shadow with offset values of 0 and 3 pixels with the color of white, and the second one has offset value of 0 and 6 pixels with the SliderTom color. So you can see now we are able to style this. If you add it to the slider.scss, there is no way you'll be able to dynamically style this. So it's always going to use that color. We don't want that. We want the user to be able to style this, but depending on whatever SliderTom color they set. So now we have that. Now this is for WebKit SliderTom. You can go ahead and do the same for the Mogs range Tom. This is for Mozilla. You can do the same. As you can see here, they both have almost the same properties. I don't need this here. So you can go ahead. I will leave that for you to do. All you just need to do is copy this right here and then change this to Mogs range slider. Something like this. So this is going to be for Firefox, then this is going to be for Chrome. You can do this if you want. So I will leave it this way. Now we've styled this. The next thing is for us to style this span tag. So for this span tag, I'm going to create another property quickly. I'll call this range slider value. This is going to be an object. Here I'm only setting the background color. So props dot SliderTom color, or rather you can use SliderTom color or linear gradient color, whatever color you want, or you can set its own property. And then I want to set the after property color. So we have this after property. I want to set a color on this as well. So here it's going to be a border. So use the ampersand, then after. So this is going to be border right, props. I'll use backticks. So I'll give this 7 pixels solid. So we're adding a border right color, and then props dot SliderTom color. I don't need this here. So for this property, this span tag, I'm adding this background color and also border right. Now let's just use this. So this is going to be classes dot range slider value right here. So on this span, save. Now let's go back. Now you can see this is the main background color, and now this is the border right. So if I remove this, save, you can see now I don't have that border right property. If I add this, now you can see I have the border right property. Now this value is not changing, so as we use this value is going to be changing. Now we have the basic styles. All we need to do is change these values and also add the linear gradients. Now we've added the main styles. Let's go ahead and add some React hooks. I'm going to add the useState, useRef, and the useEffect hook. So this, we are going to use this to update or return a stateful value and update it. This useRef to get access to this input property, and the useEffect to update this. It says accepts a function that contains imperative possibly effective code, so we can use this to update or render whatever we pass inside the useEffect function. So on this input, I'm going to add the ref right here, and I'll call this range ref. It's not defined yet, so let me go ahead and define it right here. So const range ref equal to useRef. So now we have access to this input property. We can add styles to it inside our useEffect. And then also I'm going to create another property using the useState. I'll call it range, and then set range useState right here. And this is going to take the default length as the default value. So whatever this default length value is, we are passing it as default right here. So this range and this set range property will be used to update this range right here. So now this range, let me use it here. So we have the range. As this is updated, the value here will be updated as well. Now let's create a function to set the linear gradient, but before then we need to use this set range. We are going to use it inside this handle change function, and we need to pass event.target.value. So whatever value is coming from this input, that is what we are setting right here, and that is going to be used to update this property here. So let me save this, go back, let's see. You can see now it has the default value. As I move this Tom, you can see the value here is updated as well. So right here, the value now is being updated. So the minimum value is 0, the maximum value is 100. Now the next thing we need to do is create two functions. One is just going to be the function to calculate the percentage, because we need to calculate the percentage that will determine the position of the linear gradient. So at this point where we have this Tom, the linear gradient will be from this starting point to this point where we have the value. So if I move it, it's going to reduce. If I move it to the right, it's going to be increased. So we need to calculate the percentage, or create a function called calculate percentage. Now this is going to take three properties. I'll call the first one value. The second one is going to be the minimum, and the third one is going to be the maximum value. So the value is whatever is coming from this value right here. You can call this whatever you want. So I'll just return now. So I'll return value minus the minimum, minus the minimum, divided by maximum minus minimum, then outside multiplied by 100, and then you can concatenate the percent symbol. Now this might look strange. The reason why this is done this way, it's so that we can get the correct position of the linear gradient. If I just do the normal calculation, say value divided by maximum multiplied by 100, we are not going to actually get the correct position of the linear gradient. So instead, we do the value minus the minimum value. So whatever value is passed, whatever value we have here, so 45 minus 0 divided by 100 minus 0 multiplied by 100. So this is just for calculating the percentage, but the maximum value here is 100. So if I move this down, it's going to be 23 minus 0 divided by 100 minus 0 multiplied by 100. So this is how I want to calculate the percentage. Like I said, if I just do the normal calculation, value divided by max, if I do something like this, multiplied by 100 here, if I do something like this, I'm not going to get the correct position of the linear gradient. So that is why this is being done right here. Now the second function, I'll call it range linear gradient. So I want to calculate the linear gradients. It's going to take the value, the minimum, and the maximum as properties. So this function will be used to create the or calculate the linear gradient, while we are going to use this calculate percentage inside this function. So first, let's get the percentage. This is going to be calculate percentage with value, min, and max. So this is going to calculate the percentage first. Then once we have the percentage, we can then use the linear gradient property. Now to use the linear gradient property, it's easy. So I'll create a new property. You can create a new property here, new background style. I'll use backticks. So I'll set linear dash gradient. Now this linear gradient takes in some properties. The first property we are going to add is going to be the direction, and it's going to be in degrees. So if I go back, if I set it to 90 degree, then the linear gradient will start from the left and move to the right. If you set it to minus 90 degree, it's going to start from the right to the left. If you set it to 180 degree, it's going to start from the top to the bottom. Then if you set it to the opposite, it's going to start from the bottom to the top. So we want our linear gradient to be calculated from or displayed from left to right. So here I'm going to use 90 degree. Like I said, if you use minus 90 degree, it's going to start from the right to the left. 90 degree is going to start from left to right. 180 from top to bottom, and minus 180 from bottom to top. So this is what I want, from left to right. So that is the first property. You can go ahead and look up linear gradient on Google, search for it, and try to understand how it works. Then the next property is going to be now this linear gradient color. So I'm going to pass in the linear gradient color right here, and then the next is going to be 0%, starting from 0%, and then we set the percentage. So the linear gradient color, we are starting from 0%, and then we are setting whatever the percentage value is right here. And then the next is the second color, which is the range background color. After the comma, we set the range background color, set the percentage, and then we want it to go to 100. So we're calculating from 0 to 100%. Now this has nothing to do with the value we have here. This here is just the minimum and the maximum value. Your minimum value could be 10, your maximum value could be 2000. It has nothing to do with the properties we have here, 0% and 100%. So we are starting with this linear gradient color at 0%, setting the percentage, then the range background color. So this is going to occupy whatever color we have from the left hand side. Then this range background color will occupy whatever color we have on the right hand side. So if I move this here, half of this will be the linear gradient color, then the other half is going to be the range background color, and then we're setting the percentage, then we move to 100%. So let me minimize this. So this is how we set the linear gradient. But now to use this is very simple. We are going to use this range ref property we already have here. So I'll say range ref. Then inside the hook we have the current property. So inside this current property we have access to style dot background, and then we just add this. This is just all we need to do right here. Calculate the percentage, set the linear gradient or calculate the linear gradient. And because we are using the React hook, if you are not using React hook, you are using the normal JavaScript gets elements by class name or gets element or query selector, you don't need to call this current. If you are using query selector by the class name, all you just need to do is range or range ref dot, this is supposed to be styles or style dot background. So if you're using query selector or get element by ID or whatever, it's just going to be range ref dot style dot background. But because we are using this use ref hook, we have access to this current object, and inside we get the style and the background. Then we set it to this new background style right here. Now let us use this function. First, I'll pass it into this here. So this is going to be range linear gradient, and inside we need to pass the value, the minimum and the maximum. So here I will add event.target.value, then the minimum and then the maximum value. So whenever this method is called, we are going to call this range linear gradient. So now I'll go to the browser. Right here you can see when the page loads for the first time, we don't have any linear gradient displayed. The reason is because we are not calling the range linear gradient function when the page first loads. But now if I move this, now you can see I have the linear gradient displayed. I'm calling that function right here. You can see it inside the handle change, and this is an onChange method. So whenever the value for this changes, the method is going to be called. So you can see right here. But if I reload, we don't have the linear gradient because we have a value that is not 0. So we are supposed to have a linear gradient displayed here. So I can go now. What I need to do is use this useEffect method. So here I'll call useEffect here. Now this takes a function and an array, which is a dependency array. So it's going to contain all the properties that we want this to track. Let me use the word track, so that whenever they change or the values or the properties change, this will be re-rendered. So in this function, what we need to do is I'm going to use the default value for this range, because we have a default property here. So the default value, I'll call this range value, equal to pass int range ref dot current dot value, then pass the other property, which is 10, which is going to be in base 10. So the value for this range property, we are getting it, and then I'll call this SetRange and also this linear gradient. So right here, SetRange range value, and then I'll call range linear gradient. This will take in the range value, the minimum and the maximum. Right here you can see this squiggly lines here. It says it's missing some dependencies, the max, the mean and the range linear gradient. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to add the properties range ref minimum maximum, and then here I don't want to add this range linear gradient, so I can use a command so that it's going to ignore the other property that is not added. So ESLint dash disable dash next dash line. So the only properties that I want are those the range ref, main and max. Now be careful, sometimes it's going to request that you add some missing dependencies, and then when you add those properties, you are going to get or your app is going to run into an infinite loop, whereby you have to sometimes close the tab or close the browser for you to get everything running back. So I don't really think I need this here to be added, so I'm adding this comment here with ESLint dash disable dash next line. So now you can see I don't have that squiggly warning line anymore. So I'm going to save this right now, and then if I go back, you can see I have the linear gradient because I have a value here 10. So if I change this to the default value to 50, go back, now you can see here it's 50. So I can go back. So now we are able to create this React linear or the components, the slider components. So you can go ahead and style this whichever way you want. If you want to add dynamic styles to this, I've shown you how you can use this React GSS to add dynamic styles inside the JavaScript right here. So you can change the color. So if I change this, let's say dark blue, save. Now you can see the colors for this have changed. So you can change the color whichever way you want. So I'll just go back to the other color. So right here. So here as well, I don't think inside this useEffect we necessarily don't need this, because we are already setting the default length. So if I take this, just comment this part here and then go back, reload the page, you can see we have the default value displayed. So now we are able to create our slider components, and we are able to customize it using the linear gradient and also React GSS to add dynamic CSS styles to our component. Now the reason, like I said, why we added the React GSS is because in the DOM we can't actually see this SliderTom right here, like I showed you previously. If you go back, we can only see the inputs, but we can't see this SliderTom. So this is going to be challenging or difficult to style from our external CSS file, from our components if we decide to use inline style. So the alternative is for us to use this function that allows us to dynamically style this property. So we can add these properties and then you can style whatever part of the component you want. So now all you need to do is, if you create this component and style it whichever way you want, the user can then pass the properties and it's going to be styled whichever way they want. Quickly, one last thing to add, we need to add props. So import prop types from prop types right here. And now these props that are passed here, we want to make sure that they are actually sent. So what we need to do, slider dot prop types here. So we want, this is like a mini validation to make sure that we have the right properties. So we have the step, the minimum value, the maximum value. So step, this is prop types dot number, is going to be a number, is required. So if you set this is required property and you forget to pass the property as a prop, you are going to get an error. But if you remove this is required and probably you forget to add it, you are not going to get any error. So it's good that you add this is required property if it is a required property, if it's something that is needed for the component to function properly. But if it's an optional property, then you don't need to add this is required. Then go ahead and add the other properties like the minimum. The minimum is a number. The maximum is a number as well, and they are both required properties. Then the slider, let me copy this part. The SliderTom color, can make that a string. Then I can set also the linear gradient color, is going to be a string as well. Here, let me set the default length, a number. Then set the value. The value should be a number as well. Then the onChange method, or the onChange value, this is going to be a function. So these are the props and they are all required properties. So if you miss any property from this, we're going to get an error saying we are missing a required property. So this is how you can just create a simple component, a slider component, and you can style the component, add the dynamic styling to it using this React GSS, and also we can use props so that the user can add whatever colors or whatever properties they want, like how they want the minimum value to be displayed or what the maximum value, the step. If they want a default value, they can add that, the value property itself, onChange, linear gradient color, range background color, SliderTom color. Now with this, you can go ahead and add as much props as you want, or create the component whichever way you want with the different types of properties. So with this, now we have our slider component. Like I said, you can style this whichever way you want. If you want to change the length, you want to change the width, you want to change how the Tom slider looks, or the minimum and the maximum value, you can go ahead and do that. So I'm going to end the video here. Thank you for watching, and the code for this will be made available. You can check the GitHub link in the description for the video.